There are a lot of college football fans out there who love to complain about Notre Dame's independence. They say it's unfair, outdated, and that the Irish should be forced into a conference. But on Thursday, the CFP did the exact opposite. They made Notre Dame's independence more secure than ever by changing the playoff format in a way that directly benefits the Irish. We're talking about all that and more on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a producer at Fox Sports and have been covering the Irish since 2020. It is great to have you here with me on Friday, May 23rd. So happy Friday to you. And thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We are closing in on 10,000 subscribers and I'd love your help getting us over the top. Or if you're listening to the podcast, don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast app. This episode is presented by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So, I had planned to do another Top 5 Friday today, but then the college football playoff dropped a bombshell. The CFP's management committee, which includes the 10 FBS commissioners and Notre Dame athletic director Pete Bevacqua, voted unanimously to move to a straight seeding playoff model this fall, awarding the top 4 seeds and first-round byes to the selection committee's top 4 teams in the CFP rankings, regardless of conference affiliation. That means Notre Dame will now be eligible for a first-round bye under the 12-team format, even without a conference title. So today, I'm going to break down what this means for the Irish, why it solidifies their independence, and what it says about Notre Dame's place in modern college football. Then we're going to wrap things up with a major basketball hire as Irish legend Pat Garrity returns to South Bend in a brand new GM role, overseeing both the men's and the women's basketball programs. But first, let's start with the biggest news of the week and arguably the biggest win of the offseason for Notre Dame. The college football playoff fixed an obvious flaw with their seeding format, and it is a huge win for Notre Dame and college football as a whole. ESPN's Heather Dinich and Yahoo's Ross Dellinger reported that the CFP is going to move to a straight seeding format starting this year. So the next postseason, this is going to go into effect. There is not going to be automatic byes for the top 4 conference champions like there was in the first year of the 12-team format. Now, the top 4 ranked teams, regardless of conference affiliation, will earn a bye. Conference champions still get an automatic bid in the playoffs, so I guess there is something to play for in those conference championship games, but their seed is going to be determined by the CFP rankings. And I think when this format, the expanded 12-team format, when it was initially announced, pretty much everyone with the brain realized that the automatic byes would backfire because of the lack of competitive balance between the major conferences. Last year, Boise State was ranked 9th in the last CFP rankings before the college football playoff, and Arizona State was ranked 11th. They earned byes as the 3rd and 4th seeds just because they won their conferences, but also Boise State was the highest ranked group of 5 team, and Arizona State was right behind them after they had won the Big 12. Meanwhile, Texas, who's in the SEC, and Penn State, who's in the Big Ten, both those teams were ranked higher. They had to play in the first round because they did not win their conference championships. That did not really make sense for a system that was meant to reward the best teams in college football. They wanted to get more people invited to the party, which they did, but then they restacked the rankings in the seeding, and it just did not make any sense. So under the original 12-team format, Notre Dame was explicitly excluded from earning a first-round bye because they didn't have a path to a conference championship. But that restriction is now gone. And according to Dinich, the vote to implement the change was unanimous among the College Football Playoff Management Committee. That level of unity, you can't get 11 people to agree on anything when it comes to college football. So the fact that this was unanimous tells you that there wasn't much of a debate. And I'm glad that common sense prevailed in these discussions. And this is no doubt a huge win for Notre Dame, because the only thing better than hosting a first-round game is skipping it entirely, and that is now on the table. for Marcus Freeman and the Irish. Now, if the Irish finish in the top 4, they can rest, they can heal, and they can prep during that first round week, just like the other top teams in college football. So there's never going to be a situation where Notre Dame goes through the regular season undefeated, and then they have to play one extra game. That would not have made sense if that did happen. Fortunately, it did not. Last year, Notre Dame was ranked 5th, and they weren't eligible for a bye anyway, but it could have affected future teams. And this change allows Notre Dame to play their national schedule, avoid conference politics, and still have access to the highest reward in the postseason and have an easier path, or at least not an easier, but the same path as anyone else in these situations. And I also think it's great for college football because now the system rewards the best teams, not just the most conveniently located champions. It emphasizes wins and performance over conference politics. And I have been very vocal about my just pure disdain for conference realignment ever since it started, dating back over a decade ago, right? Like there's been a lot more movement in recent years with like Oklahoma and Texas going over to the SEC and then USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten, which led to the demise of the Pac-12. This has been going on for a long time now, and it has led to a lot of unfortunate changes in college football. Rivalries are dead and things like that. And it felt like when they created this format, it was just a way to compromise with some of the conferences that, aren't at the same level as the Big Ten and the SEC. But now, conference championships do still matter. Like even the Big 12 and the ACC, their conference champion will get an automatic bid to the playoff, and it actually allows teams who are on the outside looking in, or maybe they're on the fringe of the top 12, they can still win their way in. So there is going to be some drama, there is going to be some intrigue with these conference championship games, but then they don't get the benefit of a first-round bye in a 3rd or 4th seed like it happened last year. And I also think it creates a lot more competitive matchups in the early rounds. So last year, you had games that they weren't really that competitive, but let's say that this new straight seeding model had been in effect this past season. The first round games would have consisted of Boise State at Indiana, which would have been an awesome game, Clemson at Notre Dame, which would have been great, Arizona State at Ohio State. That would not have been great, so this doesn't really support my argument. That probably would have been a bloodbath, just knowing what we know about Ohio State and their run through the playoff last year. But then SMU at Tennessee, those are intriguing matchups. None of the first round games are competitive last year, but I think that in this format, 3 of those games are probably competitive. I think Boise State and Indiana would have been good. Clemson at Notre Dame would have been awesome. Not going to talk about Arizona State, Ohio State. They would have won by 60. SMU at Tennessee, it's hard to say. It felt like Tennessee was a lot better than SMU going into the playoff, but then you look at what happened with Tennessee against Ohio State. At least, that could have been a fight, right? SMU didn't look particularly good against Penn State, but it would have been better probably than what we saw with SMU going up against Penn State and Tennessee going up against Ohio State. And I also think it creates better second-round matchups too, because you don't have a team like Oregon who had the top seed in the college football playoff, which they earned. They went undefeated in the regular season, won their conference championship game. Well, here's your reward. You get Ohio State in the second round after a bye. That didn't really make sense, that their reward for being the best team throughout the college football regular season was to play the eventual national championship in the quarterfinals. And imagine telling fans that a team ranked 11th deserved a bye over the 5th ranked team. That just doesn't make any sense. And now the rankings matter more. And even though fans love to complain about the rankings and they don't always get it right in the lead up, I do think they always get it right at the end, and that is going to lead to the exact way that the seeding is figured out. And I want to see teams, the best teams, go as far as possible and play each other on the biggest stage. And I think this is more of a possibility now with the straight seeding model. And I understand that last year the teams who did have the bye week were 0-4 in the second round matchup. So maybe some fans think it's better to play in that first round. And, for Notre Dame, having a home playoff game was really fun. But I also think that the reason the teams with the bye went 0-4 has way more to do with the individual matchups than the teams who had the first round game having any sort of competitive advantage. Each team who won in the second round was favored in that game. Ohio State was favored by 2.5. It looks like they should have been favored by 30. Texas was favored over Arizona State. That game came down to the wire, but Texas won. Notre Dame, Georgia, that line went back and forth, but Notre Dame was favored by 1 on FanDuel at kickoff. Penn State, Boise State, obviously Penn State was favored in that game. So it's not the fact that they had a bye, it's just that they were going up against better teams, partially because of the seeding model. And I think in the case of Georgia, the fact that Carson Beck was hurt certainly played a role. And Oregon had already beaten Ohio State in the regular season, but that was at Oregon, and it was a very close game. And as much as I loved being in Notre Dame Stadium for that first round playoff game against Indiana. That was an electric atmosphere, maybe the best atmosphere I have ever experienced inside that stadium. It would have been nice to have Riley Mills for the rest of the college football playoff. He suffered a torn ACL in that game, and his absence was certainly felt in that loss to Ohio State. The more playoff games you play, the more likely you are to encounter serious injuries to starters, just like when Cooper Flanagan ruptured his Achilles tendon in that game against Georgia. Obviously, that didn't matter with the seeding, but I'm just saying the more of these highly competitive games you play, the more likely you are for guys to get hurt, and that could affect your chances at making the national championship. So would I want more home playoff games? Yes, but if the option is there to have a bye, I am taking that 10 times out of 10. So this isn't just a win for Notre Dame. This is a win for logic. A straight seeded playoff makes the sport better, the postseason more fair, and now Notre Dame controls their own destiny just like everybody else. This move also says something much bigger about the school's position in college football. So coming up next, we're going to break down why this proves Notre Dame's independence isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. But my favorite thing about Monarch is that it helps you with your short and long-term goals. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You could track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. The CFP's decision to seed the top 4 teams regardless of conference affiliation doesn't just benefit Notre Dame's path to the playoff, it makes their independence more secure than ever. And I'm not going to lie, the timing of this announcement could not be more perfect, because the fans who hate Notre Dame, and specifically Notre Dame's independence, have been especially active on social media as of late, now that the Notre Dame-USC rivalry is uncertain following USC's move to the Big Ten. You see, these people think that it's somehow Notre Dame's fault that USC wants out of the rivalry because the Trojans don't want to travel and they don't want to have to play more tough games. They actually blame Notre Dame's status as an independent as the reason the rivalry might no longer exist, even though these two teams played basically every single year for a century, and Notre Dame was independent for every single one of those matchups. Does that make sense to you? Probably not. It doesn't make sense to me either, but hey, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. Theirs just happens to be the wrong one. But I give Jack Swarbrick a ton of credit in this scenario. And I understand that for some Notre Dame fans, he might be considered a polarizing figure. I think that Jack Swarbrick was an excellent athletic director at Notre Dame. Was he perfect? No, but he's human. I don't think any athletic director is perfect. And I think that Jack Swarbrick did a lot of great things at Notre Dame, and he put them in a great position going forward once he left and Pete Bavacqua took over. Jack Swarbrick took a lot of criticism when the original 12-team playoff excluded Notre Dame from earning a bye. But I said it then, and I'm going to say it now. I think Swarbrick had the foresight to believe the model would evolve. And with Pete Bavacqua now in the room, Notre Dame had direct influence in shaping this revived system. He said back then, as long as Notre Dame has access to a championship, they will remain independent. And with the new format, Notre Dame certainly had access to a national championship. But they had to play one more game. And the thought process then was, well, Notre Dame doesn't have to play a conference championship, the 13th data point, as it has been referred to as. But you didn't have to be a genius to look at that format and realize it was incredibly flawed. But like I was saying earlier, this was a way to compromise with the ACC, with the Big 12, and at the time, the Pac-12, who felt like they got screwed by conference realignment. Swarbrick knew that this format was not going to last, so he let it play out in real time, and all it took was one season to get it corrected, and Notre Dame wasn't wrong by it at all. They were the 5th seed last year, so it didn't even affect them. I bet Swarbrick is a little bit surprised at how quickly this happened, that it only took 1 year. Maybe he was thinking this might last 2, potentially 3 years. No, it took 1 year for everyone to come to their senses, look at the model and be like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. Oregon shouldn't be playing Ohio State. in the quarterfinal. And Boise State shouldn't be getting a bye. Arizona State should not be getting a bye. So common sense prevailed. And even though there were a lot of Jack Swarbrick haters who were like, what are you doing? You're purposely putting Notre Dame at a disadvantage. I felt like it was a way to compromise then, and he knew that this would happen, and guess what? It did. So now Notre Dame's independence works more than ever. They need 3 things in order to be an independent. This was true then, it's true now. They need access to the national championship in football. They need a home for Olympic sports, and they need a broadcast partner who can provide a competitive deal. Their Olympic sports still have a home in the ACC. That's not going anywhere for now. They also just re-upped their deal with NBC before last season that runs through 2029, and the amount Notre Dame brings in from that deal increased significantly once they re-upped. And now they have the potential for an easier path to the national championship than before because they are able to earn a first-round bye. Like, Notre Dame's independence was already in good shape before this move happened. Like, they earned $20 million in revenue from their playoff run this past season, and they did not have to share that with other teams in a conference like everyone else who makes a playoff run has to do. The expansion to a 12-team format helped Notre Dame because there were now 7 at-large bids and more ways for Notre Dame to get in the door. The one downfall, the only downfall in the new format was the lack of a bye week, but that's gone. And Notre Dame plays one of the most compelling national schedules in the country. Pete Bavacqua in the playoff was talking about, like, yeah, things are in a good place with Notre Dame being independent. And honestly, a couple of years ago, dating back to 2022, that wasn't the case. So there has been some momentum for Notre Dame to secure their independence because once USC left the Pac-12 to go to the Big Ten, at that moment, and with the new TV deal that the Big Ten got after that move, I felt like it might be time for Notre Dame to join a conference because we were still kind of figuring out things with the expanded college football playoff, and it felt like the TV deal, the amount of money that those Big Ten schools were going to get with this new deal, with all these new teams, and now Oregon and Washington in the mix as well, it felt like Notre Dame might not be able to have a competitive media rights deal anymore because the amount of money that the Big Ten schools were bringing in was enormous. Right? And it felt like the difference between what Notre Dame could bring in from NBC as one school compared to the mega deal that the Big Ten teams and now the SEC as well, what they were getting, there was some concern about whether Notre Dame could keep up. But guess what? Things changed. Things came into form. We started to learn what the playoff format was going to be. Notre Dame was able to sign their deal. And then it became clear they're actually in a good spot. The college football playoff is set up well for them. Salute to Jack Swarbrick for being in the room and getting that to work. And also, they're getting money with their TV deal. And even though they take less money, and if you're watching this and you are a Notre Dame hater and you think that Notre Dame stays independent for the money, let me make this clear. They make less money from their TV deal compared to teams in the Big Ten and the SEC. They have opportunities for revenue in the college football playoff, like I just mentioned, when they don't have to split that revenue. But based purely on their TV rights deal, they make less. But it's not too much that it's worth Notre Dame joining a conference, at least in their mind. And in an era where college football traditions and identity are eroding in pursuit of the almighty dollar, Notre Dame has remained steadfast in preserving who they are. It's a part of the Notre Dame identity, and it always has been. Jack Swarbrick said it best. He said, quote, "Independence was thrust upon us, but it became a defining part of who we are," end quote. Because if you remember, Notre Dame tried to join the Big Ten back in like the 1920s, so odds are you weren't alive for that. But Fielding Yost, who was at Michigan, who was a little bit unhappy with getting beat by Notre Dame on the field every single year, and he may have had some anti-Catholic thoughts about Notre Dame and the university and the obvious religious affiliation there. He didn't want Notre Dame to join the Big Ten, and he made sure that it didn't happen. So Notre Dame was like, fine, we'll be independent, and it has stayed that way ever since. You could say that this is like a 100-year grudge, but you know what? That's kind of what makes college football great. Rivalries, grudges, and in Notre Dame's case, independence. And even though every other college football program is beholden to what their conference decides for them, Notre Dame doesn't have to do that, so they just don't. And there might come a day where Notre Dame might have to join a conference. It could happen, right? Like, we don't know what the sport is going to look like in 10 or 15 years. These things are constantly evolving. But that's a problem for another day. Because right now, Notre Dame's position in the sport is as solid as it's ever been. And as much as opposing fans love to complain about the so-called special treatment Notre Dame gets, the truth is they would kill to be in the same position. Schools don't avoid Notre Dame. They line up to schedule them. Why? Because a game against Notre Dame means more national exposure, means a packed stadium, and major revenue. Notre Dame is not going anywhere, folks. They're not being forced into a conference. They're being invited to center stage, and everyone still wants a piece of the spotlight. It's not just a football program making big moves, though. Notre Dame just brought back a hoops legend to reshape both basketball programs, and the timing could not be better. As a matter of fact, it's probably a little bit overdue. So let's break down what Pat Garrity's new GM role means for Notre Dame basketball coming up next. There hasn't been a whole lot of good news to talk about with the Notre Dame men's or women's basketball programs as of late, but they just made a great move by hiring former Irish star and longtime NBA executive Pat Garrity to be the general manager for both the men's and the women's basketball programs, and this is the kind of upgrade they needed badly for both programs, okay? Garrity was a star when he was in South Bend during some pretty lean years for the program. He scored over 2,000 points in his career, fifth in school history, 1997 Big East Player of the Year, two-time academic All-American, and then he played 10 years in the NBA. He spent most of his time with the Orlando Magic, and then once his playing days were over, he transitioned to a front office role with the Pistons. He was director of strategic planning, and then he became the assistant GM, and he's going to have a very similar role at Notre Dame. It's going to be about building rosters, sustaining rosters, because as we know, rosters fluctuate year after year in men and women's college basketball. He's going to be in charge of NIL, all the strategic planning. He's basically going to be the primary sports administrator for both of these teams. He's going to deal a lot with recruiting. And even though the men's team has been pretty good at high school recruiting lately, Micah Shrewsbury takes a lot of pride in that. I think it's going to be about sustaining that roster. He's also going to have to deal with alumni relations and bringing more support back into the basketball programs, because the women's team has a ton of support. But Micah Shrewsbury was banging on the table last year because he didn't feel like his team was getting enough support. Granted, they weren't giving fans a whole lot of reasons to be excited, but I think this is all very important. And to have a front-facing person like Pat Garrity, who played at Notre Dame, who understands what the university is about and was very successful as a player, I think is huge, okay? Because Micah Shrewsbury, you know, the confidence in him has been waning for sure, just given the lackluster seasons they've had the past few years. They were really disappointing this past year. It's good to have someone who's been a part of the program, who gets it out there, trying to get things back on track. And I feel like this team, specifically the men's team, really needs direction. They have finished under 500 in 4 of the last 5 seasons. They missed the NCAA tournament in 7 of the last 8 seasons. And the women's program is entering pretty unfamiliar territory. They've had multiple key departures. The roster's in flux. You've got Hannah Hidalgo and Miles having an argument in Purcell Pavilion. Very public, not a very good look for anyone involved. And it's just not really a great time. They had a lot of high expectations going into this past year, and then they get bounced by TCU in the Sweet 16, and then Miles ends up going to the school that beat him. So it's not in a great place right now for either program, but you can't really put all that on the coaches either, because they're already maxed out managing all the on-court responsibilities they have as the coach. They have to handle recruiting. They have to keep people on their roster. So having a GM helps at least stabilize things a little bit behind the scenes, and I honestly feel like this move is long overdue. It seems like everything inside the men's program has been a little bit chaotic since Micah Shrewsbury came on board. I think he had a vision, but he also had to just completely rebuild it. Like, I'm not putting it all on Shrewsbury, because he had a very difficult situation. Notre Dame basically didn't have a player on the roster when he entered the team. But now you bring in a guy like Garrity, who has pedigree in both player development and roster construction. And I think his experience as an NBA executive brings a professional mindset to college operations. And that's kind of how things are operating these days anyway. Plus, he's a Notre Dame guy through and through, former player, academic standout. Like the fact that he's a 2-time academic All-American while also scoring over 2,000 career points. That's the kind of guy you want leading your basketball programs. And it seems like the reviews on him are extremely high. Micah Shrewsbury had a lot of good things to say. And Pete Vivacqua had a great quote. He said, quote, "We knew we had to find someone who could support our coaches with everything required off the court." Pete Vivacqua gets it. College basketball today is free agency and roster building every single year. Between NIL, the portal, year-to-year roster turnover, having a GM is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And Notre Dame has been behind the curve, so this hire helps them catch up fast. I'm going to be interested to see how he manages expectations for both of these programs, because the men's team is just trying to get back to the tournament and then do some damage, a little bit of damage when they get there, maybe make it to the second weekend. I think that should be the goal now. That shouldn't be the goal for the future. Hopefully they right the ship and then they could have higher aspirations, but it's a little bit different on the women's side. Like, they expected to win the national championship this past season because they were loaded with talent, and they won a national championship just a few years ago. So how do you balance that as the general manager when you're dealing with one program who believes they should be in the national championship every year, and then another program who that doesn't seem like a legitimate possibility anytime soon? That is going to be difficult for Pat Garrity to handle. I'm not sure how the NIL situation works. Like, I don't think the men's team and the women's team are going to have the same amount of money to work with, but when the women's team is a lot more successful, like, it's all going to be an interesting balance. So even though I really like the move, I'm not guaranteeing that it is going to be a success or that all of a sudden Notre Dame men's basketball is going to be back in the right track, because they still have a roster that doesn't look very good in the ACC, and the women's team is completely overhauling their roster. So I like the hire. It's not just a feel-good hire, it's a strategic one, but Pat Garrity has his work cut out for him with both programs. But long-term, Notre Dame needed a steady, forward-thinking voice to manage all the chaos of modern college hoops. And with Garrity, they didn't just get a smart basketball mind, they got a Notre Dame man who already understands what makes this place special. And I am hoping for the best for him, because I can't wait to watch more competitive basketball in the month of March. And hopefully we get to experience that sooner rather than later. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day, and for tuning in all week long. Good news, though. I'm going to put up a special bonus episode on the feed over Memorial Day weekend. I actually did a crossover show with the host of Locked On USC to debate and discuss the future of the rivalry. And I thought it was really interesting to hear how people on the other side view the situation, because we agreed way more than we didn't. He very much wants to see this rivalry continue. So you can check that out tomorrow. Then I'm going to be back on Tuesday after Memorial Day weekend. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, especially if you're watching on YouTube. We're getting really close to that 10K mark, and your support means the world. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave a quick 5-star review and just help us out. Help other Notre Dame fans find the show. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon.